And we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just three nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we're going to let our guest, Mr. J. Manfred Weichsel. I probably should have asked you how to say that last name. I got it wrong last time too.
It's J. Manfred Weichsel.
Weichsel. All right. So can you introduce yourself to our viewers and listeners?
Well, let's see. My name is J. Manfred Weichsel. What? I'm sorry.
Can you introduce yourself to?
Absolutely. My name is J. Manfred Weichsel, and I write a lot of different stuff. I write science fiction, horror, adventure. All my books are funny. They all have a satirical bent, and that's really the thing that unifies all my books, is that they have an element of satire in them. My two most recent books, my last one was Warrior Soul and Other Stories. It's a collection of 12 stories. 5 of them originally appeared in Cursova magazine. 2 of them appeared in the Planetary Anthology series from Superversive Press and Tuscany Bay Press. It's got 12 amazing stories. And right before that, in February of this year, I published Savage Headhunters. It's a World War II horror story set in the Pacific theater of World War II. It's got Franklin Roosevelt, it's got Hirohito, it's got Tojo, it's got all the historical figures, and it takes place on Guadalcanal. It's about the Battle of Guadalcanal. So it's an awesome book too. I publish a lot of really cool, really just fantastic, far out, funny, disturbing, weird, action-packed books.
All right. And the next part of the introduction, dear listeners, how we found them. So this one came to us from the one, the only Mr. Declan Fenn, who introduced me when I had an open call over the summer because we had a string of cancellations. Sick kids will do that to you, and I needed some people to fill the holes rather quickly. And Declan put one call out on Twitter, and he says, we've got about 100 people who said they'd come on the show. And I'm like, I don't think I can do that many in a week. So he sent us a lot of guests. But now, sir, to the religion question. Since you've been on the show before, I think you were episode 189, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
So we're gonna mix this up just a little bit. So Stargate, Lost in Space, or Warehouse 13?
Gosh, that's a really tough question because Stargate SG-1 and Lost in Space are both shows that kind of took me through different difficult times in my life. Just, you have a hard time, you come home from work and, you need an episode of something. You need to watch something that you love, that'll be familiar and that'll take you away from the grind that you just came from. And both of those shows in different times in my life filled that void. So, Warehouse 13, I don't know what that is. So that's an easy one to scratch off the list. But Stargate SG-1 and Lost in Space, I don't know if I could choose between those two because they're just both really wonderful shows for very different reasons.
Okay. So because we're polytheistic, Willow, Beastmaster, or Conan the Barbarian?
Oh, wow. You mean the movies, not the because Beastmaster is also a novel by Andre Norton, and everybody knows Conan is Robert E. Howard. But as far as the movies Beastmaster and Conan go, they're both fantastic films. Beastmaster has more of that kind of campy appeal to it, while Conan is just a marvelous, epic, grand film. So I'm going to say I have to go with Conan. Willow is a good movie. I know it tanked when it came out, and it almost ruined George Lucas's career. It kind of knocked that shine off of him a little bit, knocked him down a little bit in terms of prestige. But it's a solid movie. But I'd say Conan is one of the greatest ever made. Beastmaster is a whole lot of fun. There's the little scene at the end of Beastmaster. It's kind of, you might miss it, but the villain is like standing right by the edge of the volcano or whatever, the chasm, and the ferret dives at the villain and tackles him and knocks him over the edge into the lava and sacrifices himself to kill the villain and save everybody. And I think that's really beautiful with the little ferret. But Conan, of course, is just an amazing just movie. I don't think they won't ever make a movie like either of them, but I'd have to say Conan is the better one. And too, I love Robert E. Howard. I love Andre Norton too, but they're good for different reasons. Howard is really majestic in his writing. He's just is amazing. Well, Andre Norton is a little cheesier, but still a lot of fun. But just doesn't often reach the same heights that Robert E. Howard does.
So the reason we picked the ones we did is because all of them have novelizations. So I don't know if the novels came first in Willow, for instance, but it's the Chronicles of the Shadow War series. I think book 1 is Shadow Moon, if I'm not mistaken, but that's a novelization as well. In fact, George Lucas has a novel title credit on that one. So probably movie came first, but they're all novels as well. Or in Conan's case, there's also a bunch of comics.
Yeah. Did you know that there was a novelization?
Interesting.
Did you know there was a novelization of King Kong?
I did not. Was the novel after, or did it come?
Came out right after the movie. It was based on the screenplay. It came out like a year after the movie, or maybe even less.
That's pretty awesome.
There's also a trilogy of novelizations of Godzilla written in Japanese that have not had a professional translation into English, but they're going to come for the first time, I think, later this year or next year.
Okay, so moving on to talking about you as the nerd. So we here at the Blasters and Blades.
The nerd,
me? What was your first love, sci-fi or fantasy?
Oh, science fiction, definitely. I felt, because when I think, a lot of kids are like this. Like people think that children are going to respond to fantasy more than they do science fiction, but kids, their imagination's really stimulated by hard science fiction, by like visions of the future where they're extrapolated from the present, where it's a real what if question about the future. Just that's the way kids are. They are thinking a lot about the future. What's the world going to be like when I grow up? What's it going to be like when I'm an adult? And books that make a serious effort to predict the future really appeal to kids. So like a lot of old Asimov, like the Foundation series, like that's a great series for kids. Like I know some kids now, 8-9 years old, who just are crazy about that series. A lot of Heinlein's juveniles, especially the ones that have to do with space exploration, kids love those. The early Dune books are great for kids too. But yeah, definitely science fiction. And I think, that was true when I was a kid, and from what I can see, it's true now. Like I try to show the kids fantasy, that I know, and they're not interested in that, because that's something that can never be. But I think fantasy, people think it appeals to kids, but it's really for older people. You have to be a grown-up to really appreciate the kind of metaphysical thought that goes into a really great fantasy.
Okay. So what was your first discovery of science fiction? Do you remember what property, be it movie, board game, video game, whatever?
Absolutely. I was at an aerospace museum, and we were at the gift shop, and I was looking around the gift shop, and there were, some of the old Heinlein juveniles. And I looked them up, and I looked at them. I looked at the back cover, and it was either Starman Jones or Rocket Ship Galileo. I don't really remember which one, but, something about it, just the cover art and the description on the back really kind of caught me, and I picked it up and I started reading it. And, I just kind of fell in love. Later on, I discovered Analog, Science Fiction and Fact, that magazine, just waiting online at the supermarket with my parents later. And, so I started buying that. And I used to read the Writers of the Future books, that collection when it came out too. And from that, it just kind of spiraled. I learned about like the Hugo Awards and the Nebula Awards. And, this is like the 80s before they still had some prestige to them. I guess I don't want to say, but I learned about those, and like I was just like in awe that there was people that were writing books and winning awards and being a member of an organization called SFWA, and because growing up where I did and in the kind of place I did, like just the idea that there were people writing books was something very foreign to me, and it was an idea that was kind of outside of the world that I was a part of, and I was interested in it, and I wanted to learn about it. And I kind of decided that, I had decided that people who write books were these like fantastic, like larger than life, like godlike figures who were creating these worlds. And I was really in awe just of the idea that there could be something called an author and somebody who wrote these books. I didn't quite understand how they did it, but I was just really very much in awe of that whole idea.
Okay. So what is it about speculative fiction, the sort of umbrella of all things, that you love so much?
I love the imagination. I love the imaginativeness of it, and all of the different worlds that you can explore. These aren't going to be very popular answers, but I really like the social commentary. Like a lot of Heinlein, I read Heinlein, and he just, there's a part in any Heinlein novel, almost any, where he just stops writing the book and just starts ranting about whatever he saw in the newspaper that morning that made him angry. And that can be fascinating, because you really do have a snapshot of this guy who, he read the newspaper, he started writing a book. He just, in the middle of the book, just started ranting about what he saw in the newspaper, and it made him really angry. And just the kind of snapshot that you get of the time that any author lived in is really fascinating to me. And this is just as much true about classic authors as it is science fiction. Like I love to read a lot of classics, and when I do, it's often for me a gateway into learning about the history of when those authors lived. So I went through a phase when I was reading a lot of Victorian literature, and I learned about the Boer Wars and the Sulu Wars in Africa just from reading H. Rider Haggard novels, for example. But even going back further, I read a lot of just classic literature from the ancient world. Like everything I know about the Peloponnesian War, I learned from Aristophanes, for example. I've never read a history of the Peloponnesian War, but I know a little bit about it. I know who Cleon was, and all of that just from reading the old satires about the war. So I think fiction in general is a great way to learn about the past, and science fiction from the 50s, 60s, 70s. It was a really great way to learn about mid 20th century American culture and just, how people thought then and what their hopes and dreams were and what their fears for the future were. And, just all of that, what their attitudes about various things were, and that they're very fascinating people. The mid 20th century Americans, they were very industrious. What's that?
I didn't say anything. I was listening to you.
They were very industrious people, and they were very optimistic and had a lot of hope for the future, but they also had a lot of fears about the future and what kind of technology the future was going to bring. And a lot of their fears, if we listen to them now, we'd be in a much better place than we are, because a lot of them really, it was just spot on. Like if you read Alfred Bester, The Demolished Man. A lot of people consider that novel the first cyberpunk novel. It was written in the 60s, and it doesn't have a computer in the entire book. It's about psychics, but when you see the scenes of the psychics together and they're communicating psychically, one mind to the other, it really does sound a lot like an internet social media site like Twitter or a chat room or some sort of board where everybody's just kind of talking over one another and getting little snippets of what one person says and another person says. So although like Bester didn't predict the computer, he predicted the state that we'd be living in the future. And that's really fascinating and really prescient in a way that perhaps Bester didn't know about. And maybe my work is going to be prescient in a way that I don't know about, that I'm not aware of right now, but somebody in the future, 70 years from now, 60 years from now, is going to read one of my books and wow, how did he know that? How did he know it was going to look like that? And, that's just because, I'm thinking about those things and trying to look at them. Part of it also, if I'm going to be a little bit cynical, might just have to be if you write a lot of nonsense, eventually some of it will come true. There's a Victorian era children's series that's kind of an Alice Wonderland ripoff, but the main character's name is Baron Trump, which is Donald Trump's kid. So people on the internet think that guy predicted the future, but he didn't. It's just a coincidence. He was writing a lot of nonsense poetry, and some of it sounds like something today. So that's my answer.
So how did your love of the reading all things speculative fiction transition into you deciding to write your stories?
Well, when I was a kid, I was really very bookish, and I'm still bookish as an adult. I guess it's kind of gone on and off. I've had periods in my life where I didn't read at all, and periods in my life where I read very heavily. Right now I'm reading a lot, of different stuff. I read everything from. I love classic satire. I love Rabelais and Jonathan Swift and Lawrence Stern. Tristram Shandy is just a fantastic book. And, I always wanted to be a writer. But, and I always dabbled in it. I'm pretty old. I'm in my mid 40s now. And throughout my life, there were just periods where I just wanted to drop everything I was supposed to be doing and start to write. But the problem was that I had responsibilities that kept on calling me back and calling me away from writing. I have to make money. I've got to pay the rent. I've got, you got to work the job, and you got to do this and that. So, I'd get into it. I would do it. I would get pulled away. I'd get into it again. I'd do it again. I'd pull away. Then I was living in LA trying to just, become a screenwriter. And I don't really know what I was doing there. Just kind of learning from, making mistakes in life, I guess. Growing and changing. So, I was there, and then the pandemic hit, and I kind of lost my job and moved back to East Coast to New Jersey, and and by that time I was publishing a lot. I was publishing in Cursova, and I was writing short stories, and submitting them. But, at that time I said, you know what, I want to focus on long fiction. I want to learn how to self-publish, and I want to just focus on doing this. It's been my dream my whole life, and I've always dabbled in it. And even in a way, like what I was doing with the short fiction, was I was learning how to write. I was learning how to tell a story, and how to write a good sentence, and how to construct a paragraph, and how to develop a character and a world, and all that. So I was definitely learning, but at the same time, it was time for me to take the leap to the next step. So and it would have been time regardless of whether everything shut down, but everything shutting down is what gave me the opportunity to really hone my skills, start writing longer stuff, and learning how to self-publish. And I looked at what was going on in March of 2020 when everybody was scared and freaking out, and I said, this is the greatest opportunity I've ever had in my life. I have no responsibilities. I'm being taken care of by checks from the government, bigger than what I was making before. I don't have all these extra expenses with commuting and traveling to work and parking and buying lunch and all of that. I can really just sit down and focus on what I've always wanted to do. So I took that opportunity, and I sat down and I started working on Ibu Gogo, which was based on something I'd written earlier and kind of finished and then not finished and then finished and then not finished. And, I tried to write it before I really knew how to write. But now I knew how to write because I'd had years of practice having short stories published. So I sat down, I started working on Ibu Gogo, set it up, got a great cover artist, got a great cover, and, I published that sucker, and people just loved it. It's a funny book. It's satirical. It pokes fun at a lot of things that are going on and today and in 2020 when I wrote it. And, it's just a really fun, exciting book. It's by cryptozoologists, and they're in the jungle, and they're in Indonesia, and there's a husband and wife, their ex-wife, I mean. And they're both searching for these little cryptids called Ibu Gogo. They're these little tiny people who are rumored to live on the island of Flores in Indonesia. Scientists discovered these little fossilized hominids, these miniature people called Homo floresiensis, which many believe are the Ibu Gogo from Indonesian legends. So I took the Indonesian legends, I took all the scientific, research, and I really studied evolution. I read like all the Smithsonian articles and the National Geographic articles to trace like human evolution from, like the Neanderthal to Homo erectus, to Homo habilis, and all the different species and how they interacted with each other way back when, before there was Homo sapiens, and to write the backstory for how the Ibu Gogo could have come to be and could have gotten to Indonesia. And I wrote this like really wild jungle adventure novel with a lot of sex, a lot of nudity, a lot of violence and gore, a lot of action, a lot of running through the jungle. And I just wrote like a really fun novel, and people just really dug it. And, so after that, took another old story of mine. It was originally called Alter Ego, but I changed the name to Five Maidens on a Pentagram, completely rewrote it, finished it, turned it into another novel, published it. That one's Five Maidens on the Pentagram. It's a gothic horror sex farce about a guy with dissociative identity disorder, and he's in a mental hospital. Usually he's just a completely normal guy, but when he gets scared, he turns into his evil alter ego, Maldeus. But his name's Jonah, and Jonah learns that his Dr. Strand, is actually an evil wizard named Hasatan, who's working with his alter ego Maldeus to sacrifice women to a demon on a giant pentagram in the basement of the hospital. So he's a mental patient. No one will believe him that his doctor is a Satan worshiper. So what he does is he goes undercover, pretending to be his alter ego in order to uncover his doctor's evil plan. And so that was my second book. I've got 10 books out. I could describe them all right now. But after that was Jungle Jitters, which is really a satire of my time in Hollywood. But it is also about, do you know who Ilya Ivanov Ivanovich is?
I do not.
Well, he was a Russian mad scientist who really was a real person who tried to mate human beings with apes in order to create a hybrid species of human apes. And, this was funded by the Soviet government. And he actually traveled to France and then to French colonial Africa in order to mate humans with apes. He was kicked out of French colonial Africa. They were like, yo, you can't do that. That's like wrong. They send him back to Russia, but they let him bring a bunch of chimpanzees with him. They all die on the way to Russia. He winds back in Russia, and he's now like a pariah, and he gets exiled to Afghanistan, where he spends his last remaining years. So I wrote a story imagining that he survived and started a cult in the middle of the Congo, where the people, for spiritual reasons, are trying to mate humans with apes in order to create a hybrid species to fulfill their twisted dreams for humanity's future. And so they lure Hollywood ingenues, wannabe movie stars, to the Congo under the guise that they're going to shoot a movie there, a jungle adventure show or whatever. They do this for 100 years until finally they lure our three heroines, the Action Girls. They have a little YouTube show called The Action Girls to the Congo, and jungle adventure hilarity ensues. There's a lot of gore. There's a lot of you can see on YouTube, but there's a lot of non-consensual sexual activity between human females and simians. There's weird scenes of artificial insemination. There's human chimp hybrids. There's mad scientists with turkey basters. You name it. It's a crazy jungle adventure. It's probably my most controversial book. Some people love it, and it gets great reviews. Other people, it just pisses them off, and they write very angry things. And so that's my most controversial book. And after that is Not Far from Eden, which is based on the apocryphal books of Enoch and Jubilees. It's about the story of the Watchers, angels who are sent to Earth by God to educate humans, but instead they mate with the human women. They find them very attractive and create giant beings called Nephilim, which God eventually floods the earth in order to destroy. Then I wrote the Caledonian Boar Hunt. We discussed that in issue 189, in episode 189. So I don't need to get into that because I spoke about it at great length with you. And then after the Caledonian Boar Hunt, Planet of the Wage Slaves, a little satire about horrible jobs I've had. It's very if you're into the whole anti-work thing. And then after that was Savage Headhunters, which is the third book in my Tales to Make You Vomit series, which also has She Was Asking For It in Kitty Cat Massacre. That's my extreme horror series. Extreme horror is a very cool niche. A lot of really great people in that community. if you are part of that. It's really awesome. And then after Savage Headhunters was my most recent book, Warrior Soul and Other Stories, a collection of my published short stories, which I'm here to talk about today.
All right. So since you mentioned what brought you here, before we do that, we're gonna do a little bit of the fandom stuff. But have you gotten any cool fan art or cosplay since you started writing?
Actually, I just got my first piece of fan art. It was by an old buddy of mine named Seth Matoyer. When I lived in Hollywood, he does a lot of stuff. He produces really low budget horror movies, really cool movies. I actually worked on the set of, I think, at least one, maybe more, if I remember right, that he produced. The one I worked on was Ballet of Blood, directed by Jared Masters. He's a really awesome exploitation filmmaker. I was on the set working on that. I've got my IMDb credit for that and everything. And I may have worked on some other movies. Remember, but he also does music. He's in several heavy metal bands. He's got a record label, and he does a lot with art, and he's experimenting with AI. So he did some fan art for Jungle Jitters. The three girls in that, they're called the Action Girls, and he did a fan art portrait of the Action Girls, which he posted to Twitter just a few days ago. And I think that was really, really cool of him. I'm really grateful for him. I want to see more fan art, to be honest. I mean, I was just blown away. I felt so good seeing that. I'd love to see more. But the thing, you mentioned cosplay, and the thing that I would love to see more than anything else is women cosplaying the characters in my book covers. I think that would just be fantastic. Like Ibu Gogo, Jungle Jitters, Five Maidens on the Pentagram, even Warrior Soul and Other Stories. I know you're looking at a censored version of the cover right here, all of you listening at home. But if you just click on the link, you'll see the actual cover. Love to see women cosplay as my characters on my book covers. This cover in particular illustrates a scene from the story Warrior Soul. Now, this is about, there's two girls, they're Peace and Mel, and very strange, they've been panhandling in Washington Square Park in Manhattan. And a very strange photographer has just lured them into his studio. And, on the guys that he wants to take a modeling shoot, photographs of them, do a modeling shoot. So he takes their picture and slowly he gets them out of their clothes until they're all both completely naked. And then, he has a camera that photographs models' souls. And what he really wants is a photograph. So, they're posing for him. They're naked. He takes out the camera. He snaps their picture and poof, everything disappears. And they're transported into parallel universe, which and they're very surprised and scared to get there. They're very frightened, and that's what this cover represents. That it's an illustration of that scene from Warrior Souls.
Okay, so has anybody asked for your autograph since you started writing?
Yeah, once. This was pre-pandemic. This was in 2019, and my first, before I started self-publishing, this small press had published a collection of my short stories up to that point. There was 6 stories in that collection. 4 of them are in Warrior Soul and Other Stories. The other 2 aren't. Their alter ego was expanded to the novel Five Maidens on the Pentagram, and We Might Not Have Fire, but We Sure Shall Have Fury is, I re-edited it. I completely rewrote the entire thing. It was like this 20, maybe 16,000 word story. I whittled it down to 5,500 words and made it a really tight action story, because I thought the original was just very very lumberous and just too big and too like wordy and didn't have like the right kind of action. So I cut it down to 5,500 words and completely rewrote the entire thing word for word. And it's now my selection. In Cursova magazine is publishing this really cool anthology called Son of Hercules. And it's about the old Peplum sword and sorcery movies. If you like Italian cinema, they're the Maciste movies in Italy, and it's based on that character Maciste and the Sons of Hercules from the American version. So I re-edited it and rewrote it word for word into my Maciste story called Maciste in the Land of the Snakes. And that's going to be coming very soon from Cursova. The Kickstarter for that is coming soon. I know it's not up yet. We're talking in the middle of March right now, but by the time this podcast is released, maybe you'll be hearing about that Kickstarter. I don't know. Maybe it's going to come later in the year, but that's coming very soon, and I'm very excited about that because it's going to be an awesome project with a lot of really awesome writers. I'm not even sure if I'm really supposed to be talking about it yet, but I'm just so excited about this project that I can't help it. I've got to talk about it because the story that I got for it is just out of sight. It's an amazing story. This project has so many great writers, and I'm just totally excited for it.
All right. So finally, what would be the weirdest or funniest interaction with fans you've had since you started writing?
Well, that would be, very recently. So I got some older experiments in self-publishing. They were like before I learned how to self-publish. Like I didn't know how to do anything. I didn't even know to hire an editor. I just thought like, oh, you edit yourself, and So and I didn't really know how to write the stories yet. I wasn't writing it, and I was writing short fiction, but I hadn't really learned how to write longer fiction yet, which is a different skill. So my first two self-published books are out of print. And I got a lot of fans who collect my paperbacks. They're really popular. My paperbacks a lot of times do better than my ebooks, and my ebooks sell very well, but sometimes my paperbacks sell better just because they really like to collect my paperbacks. I've also got books on other ebook only platforms, and a lot of my ebook readers, they'll buy the ebooks and then they'll want the paperback and they'll go to Amazon or another store and get it. So he collects my paperbacks. He's got every single J. Manfred Weichsel paperback. He's read all my books. He's reviewed them on Amazon. But I came a little late, and he missed these two early books that were before I was anybody. So he was begging me to republish these books just long enough for him to order the paperbacks. And, I kept on saying no. Like, this started about a year ago. And he was asking me on Twitter. He was asking me just, all different ways. And each time I said no. And finally, Warrior Soul is about to come out, and he sent me a DM. I'm really excited about your book. I really want to read these two books, and they're out of print. I need to read all the J. Manfred Weichsel books. So finally, I felt, well, okay, he's a really good fan. He's a really great guy, and so I'll do this for him. So I republished those two books, kept it very on the download, didn't tell anybody, and I kept in touch with him via DM, wrote him immediately. I got the message that those books went live. He ordered them. Now, the thing is, I had to keep them up until they shipped, because if I'd unpublished them before they shipped, Amazon wouldn't ship them. I made sure that I learned all that by asking around in, all the self-publishing groups, like 20 books to 50K, to figure out, how that would work. Wide for the Win, too, I asked there. And so I learned asking those groups, got to leave the book up. So I republished the book. He orders it, and usually it takes like 2 or 3 days for a book to ship. I saw the spike in the sales rank. He told me he ordered it, but then like a day goes by, it doesn't ship. 2 days, 3 days. I'm starting to get really worried here, because what if other people start ordering these books that I really don't want commercially available? I'm getting a little concerned. I'm sweating a little bit. Like another day goes by. It took a whole week for those books to ship, and I get the notice because that little gray line goes up on the old Amazon report, and the payment comes in on your payment report, and he told me they shipped, but it took a whole week for those books to ship. And I was sweating there for a while. I tell you, I was really getting nervous. But so that's probably my most funniest interaction with my fans.
All right. Well, that was a good introduction. And since we've mentioned what we're going to talk about today, Warrior Soul, before we do that, we're going to pause for a moment while we shamelessly shill for the man and play this commercial.
Across 1,000 battlefields and 1,000,000 wars, there is always a question. What do you do when all the chips are on the table? Do you run? Try to find salvation in the arms of an easy peace? Or do you stand and fight and send your enemies into whatever hole they crawled out of? On Deadly Ground, a heroic Last Stand anthology, has 10 stories addressing that question. Each character faces the impossible in different ways, but all will be tested before the day is done. Can they earn a heroic victory amongst the endless eternity of space, or are they doomed to fall into obscurity?
So thank you for sticking with us through that commercial interlude. Thank you to the sponsor. I hear he's a stand-up guy. And now we'll get back to it. So before we get started, given the cover that we talked about was a little, shall we say, risque, what rating would you give this collection of short stories?
It's really actually all over the place. Like, some of the stories are pretty sexy. Warrior Soul is a pretty sexy story. Going Native is a pretty sexy story. The Black Jewel is a pretty sexy story. So a lot of the stories are really sexy, but others are family friendly. The Rainbow Colored Rockhopper that was in the Planetary Anthology series. I thought I was writing it for Superversive Press. Really, I was writing it for Tuscany Bay Press because they took that series over and published it. That one is could be read by a family, family friendly. And there's a couple other. The first two. The second story, Queen of the House, is a family-friendly story too. And the first one doesn't really have much sex or violence in it either. It just has psychedelic drugs, which are also pretty taboo and not appropriate for kids. Some stories are inappropriate for kids. Others would be completely fine. But, because I put them all together, the collection as a whole is for adults. As far as the cover goes, there's some authors who that they're making their cover. They do something called market research, okay, where they say, okay, I'm writing in a genre. I'm going to go to Amazon and look at all of the different covers and the books in my genre, and I'm going to do a cover that's exactly like those. And I think that's horrible. Because when they do that, all the covers wind up looking the same. And who wants to live in a world where everything looks the same? I don't want to live in that kind of world. So when I'm making these books, I'm thinking, what kind of world do I want to live in? And I want to live in a world where everything looks unique and different. That's the kind of world I want to live in too. And so, I just do my book covers, the way I want. I want to put naked women on my book covers. I'll put naked women on my book covers. I think what they're doing is horrible, just making everything look the same. I think everyone, you need to look different. You need to develop your own brand and your own voice and really stand out because if you're just like everybody else, then you're interchangeable with everybody else. And guess what? That means that you can easily be replaced by a machine with today's technology. But if you're going to be really original and unique, and you're going to write in your own voice and really, speak from your heart and put what you want in that book cover instead of what other people tell you to put on the book cover, that's how you're going to stand out. That's how you're going to get ahead, and that's how you're going to get the kind of career that I have, where everybody knows who I am. Maybe some of them love me, some of them hate me, They know who I am, and when they see one of my book covers, they can recognize it as a J. Manfred Weichsel cover. Strangers come up to me. They say, I see your book covers. I love them. Strangers come up to me. They say, I see your book covers. I hate them. But they all remember them, and that's the important thing.
So you have 12 stories in this collection. Do you have a favorite?
I'd say Warrior Soul is my favorite, which is why I called the collection Warrior Soul and Other Stories, and why I decided to name the collection Warrior Soul. And, that one originally appeared in the issue of Kursova that had the Lost Tarzan story. It was volume 2, issue 1, and it had a story called Tarzan and the Mysterious She. It was a short story that was left unfinished by Edgar Rice Burroughs, but it was completed by an author named Michael Tierney with the go-ahead, with the blessing of the Burroughs estate. And he finished it, and it was published in the first issue of volume 2 of Kursova. And I was very lucky to have Warrior Soul appear in the same issue as that Tarzan story. That was one of the highlights of my career, and I'm extremely lucky that I was given that opportunity, because a lot of people learned about me through that issue of Kursova. By that time, I already had some longtime fans. A lot of people told me that this was my best story, and I still think it's up there. It's one of the best short stories. It's weird. It's got a Weird Tales C.L. Moore vibe. When I wrote it, I was thinking Northwest Smith, C.L. Moore's hero. I wanted to make a female equivalent. So while he's this smuggler who's daring and always gets in trouble with women, I decided I'd make a woman who, gets in trouble with men, in order to, kind of do a little bit of, gender swapping with that character. And, I think it turned out great. I always wanted to turn this one into a series, and I never quite got around to it. Even when I wrote it, I wanted to. There's a second story starring the same character. Her name is Peace. There's a second story in the collection called The Black Jewel, starring the same character. I just never got around to really turning it into a series. What I would need in order to do that is like hundreds of people just spontaneously saying, wow, we love this character piece. We want to see a series of books about her, a novel about her. And, I'd totally sit down and write that. But that's pretty much what I need in order to do that. But it's definitely my favorite story in this book, for sure. And they're all good. They're all written at different, they're all written between 2018 and 2022. Most of them were written 2018 to 2020. And I think 2 of them were written during the, no, more of them were, some of them were written later, but most of them they were in between 2018 and 2022. So they really represent my development as an author, and just my formative years. And a lot of the ideas that went into my longer stories you can kind of find their roots in these stories. For example, like Jungle Jitters. If you read Jungle Jitters and you read Complicit in Their Bondage, which was originally published in the Planetary Earth anthology from Superversive Press, you're going to find a lot of the ideas I started to develop in Complicit in Their Bondage, I continue to develop in Jungle Jitters. So if you've read Jungle Jitters and you're kind of interested in like the genesis of those ideas, you can go back and you can look at Complicit in Their Bondage and kind of find that. And, same with Ibu Gogo. It sounds kind of weird. A lot of ideas that originally, that appear in Ibu Gogo, a lot of them were really developed in like stories like Going Native, where it has to do with interspecies relations and mating and all of that. But in Going Native, you'll see the seed of the idea, and when you read Ibu Gogo, you're going to see how that idea developed and blossomed into a full idea that was novel length instead of a short story. And I think, you see that in a lot of parallels between my longer works and my shorter ones that appear in Warrior Soul and other stories. So if you're a fan of some of my longer works, definitely check this collection out and read it, and you'll see like how a lot of my ideas developed over time. And I can't believe I'm saying this because there's a lot of people who they'll go to like English class and they'll learn about like how writers' ideas developed, and they'll be like, that's BS. The writer doesn't know what they're doing. The teacher is extrapolating that from what the teacher interprets from what he or she has read. But those cynical students are wrong. Do develop ideas over time, and you can see, with me, ideas that appear in one story in one book are further developed in other stories in other books. For example, like I got like Not Far From Eden, which is based on old apocryphal texts like the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, and also the Bible, the Book of Genesis, and then the Caledonian Boar Hunt, which is developed from an old Greek myth of the same name. And when I was adapting those stories, like when I was writing Not Far From Eden, I was really learning how to do those kind of adaptations. And then when I wrote the Caledonian Boar Hunt, I kind of continued that. And then when I wrote Savage Headhunters, which came out in February of this year, that's based on World War II, the Battle of Guadalcanal, and a lot of old stories from that, and old historical photographs of soldiers headhunting and posing with Japanese skulls. And when I adapted those photographs and those old stories from history, I took a lot of what I had learned from adapting myths, and I used that in order to write historical fiction. So I almost kind of created a new genre. One blogger said I created a new genre called extreme historical fiction with Savage Headhunters, because it's really extreme horror, but it's also historical fiction. But I also was thinking about the history as myth, and how World War II is really the foundational myth of the modern era, but it's also an era which, because of geopolitical reasons, is coming to an end, and we don't know what the next era is going to be. I can't predict that, and who knows? Maybe the modern era won't come to an end, and all the people who are trying to predict things are wrong. But maybe it'll just continue for another 50, 60, 100 years. But I was really thinking about its foundations, and how like Genesis is a foundational myth that I based Eden on, and the Caledonian Boar Hunt is a foundational myth that I based that book on. So I was thinking of World War II as a foundational myth when I wrote that, and because I'm a subversive writer, I was thinking, well, how can I undermine that myth? And how can I make it meaningful to people today, living at a time when the modern era might be coming to an end and transitioning into whatever the next era is going to be.
Okay. So you talked about your favorite story. Do you have a favorite main character of all the 12 stories in this collection?
Yeah, I would say my favorite main character is the narrator of Going Native. He's just graduated high school, and his parents have bought him a tour, a galactic tour. So he's on a tour ship, touring all the different planets, and he's supposed to be seeing all the museums, all the educational sites, but he's at a resort planet, and he wants to stay there. He meets a native woman. And, he's really excited to hook up with this native woman, but he hasn't really thought about the consequences. He knows what they are because he learned that interspecies relationships can be dangerous. He learns in school that interspecies sex can be dangerous, so he knows it, but he doesn't care about all those warnings. He's very young. He just wants to go ahead and do it. He does, and he suffers some consequences because of that. So, it's a lot of things in there, but I just like that he's young. He thinks that there's no consequences or that they don't apply to him. And then he goes, he does it, he learns that they are, and he learns his lesson. J.D. Cowan, he called that book a PSA against sex with aliens when he reviewed it on his blog. He reviewed that story when it first appeared in Crossover Magazine, Volume 1, Issue 8. And that's really what it is. I was actually had that in mind. I was gonna originally make it a lot more on the nose as a PSA, but I took a lot of the on the nose stuff out in order to make it more like a fictional story. But even so, he picked up on that, and I was really impressed with his analytical skills when he did. So that's my favorite character, the narrator from Warrior Soul. I mean, from Going Native.
So what would your 30-second elevator pitch for this collection be?
Oh, wow. An elevator pitch for a series of short stories is kind of hard because, I lived in Hollywood for 10 years, and an elevator pitch is the plot. The elevator pitch is like, this is a story about a blank character who must do blank or else blank will happen. The first blank is an adjective. The second blank is what the character has to do, and the third blank is the horrible thing that will happen if the character doesn't do it. So for Five Maidens on the Pentagram, that's really easy. This is a story about a completely sane mental patient named Jonah with dissociative identity disorders. When he learns that his doctor is sacrificing women to Satan, no one will believe him because he's a mental patient. So he goes undercover as his alter ego in order to uncover his doctor's plan. That would be the elevator pitch to Five Maidens on the Pentagram. But for a short story collection, I guess I'd have to talk about later. I'd have to say this is a story about this is a collection of stories that have appeared in pulp magazines. They range from action and adventure to horror to science fiction to fantasy. A lot of them are really funny, some of them are scary and disturbing, some of them are really sexy, some of them are just fun. All of them are fun. So if you want to read a really just fun collection of stories, just a variety of short stories that showcases me and my style and everything that I wrote that helped shape me into the writer that I am today, and you want to trace what I did in this book that I think is really interesting is put the stories in the opposite order of which they were originally published. So you start with my most recent published short story, September 2022, and then you go backwards to my first published short story in April of 2018. So I put them in the reverse order of how they were published. And I thought in that way it would be really fun for people to go and follow my development as a writer backwards, to start with my recent story and then go back to my first published short story. I thought that was a really neat idea, and I thought it would be fun for readers to follow my development in reverse. And I also think in the future, when I'm read by scholars who are trying to understand my work and are trying to really get a picture of what this era through reading my fiction, I think some of them are going to notice that and are going to really appreciate it and are going to think it's a lot of fun. So maybe I don't know how long these podcasts are going to last. All those early blogs from the early 2000s, they're gone. All that history from the internet, people thought it was going to live forever, and it developed and shaped the world that we live in today. It's all gone. Those blogs are gone, and they're irretrievable. And we don't know if that's going to happen today. There's other total blind spots in history, early broadcast television. None of it exists. None of the early because they didn't record it at first. They just let the signals go out into outer space. So like light years away, there's signals from like the early broadcast TV. Maybe if we ever learn to travel faster than the speed of light, we can get them and send them back. But other than that, that stuff is lost. And even like the DuPont channel was the only channel to record its television during that era. And they put all the recordings in a warehouse in Manhattan, I think, or maybe not Manhattan, maybe it was like one of the boroughs. But they put all those recordings in a warehouse. Then in the 1970s, they decided it was too expensive to store all those recordings. They dumped them in the East River, destroying the only record of television from that era that exists. So the first science fiction show is gone, the first televised soap opera is gone, the first mystery show is gone. It's all disappeared. All that history is completely vanished, and we have no way of knowing about it. And the reason we don't know about it is because it's gone. It's vanished. So we never know what's going to last. And this podcast, it could last like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years from now, some academics or archaeologists, they might want to find out what kind of fiction people were talking about, or J. Manfred Weichsel, little fragments of his stories might exist here or there, or even a couple entire books, and they might want to learn what he was talking about. They might listen to this, or it might just vanish. It might just go poof, and 10 years from now, just like, or 20 years from now, just like all those old blogs, this podcast could be gone. YouTube could be gone. All the podcasts could be gone. All of Amazon's records could just vanish. My paperback books could disintegrate. It could all be lost, or people could consider it important, and they could save it, like those DuPont video cassettes or whatever they used to record media on it. At that time, they didn't consider that important, so they dumped it in the East River. If that stuff was around like during the DVD era or even the VHS era, it'd be worth hundreds of millions, maybe billions of dollars. People would pay to put that stuff out. Even today during streaming, there'd be streaming services that would be streaming that stuff, but in the 70s, they didn't have home media. They didn't have streaming. There's no way to monetize it. They didn't consider it historically important, so they just dumped it. So attitudes about these things, they change over time. And what people value in the 70s is not what people value in the 90s or 2000s. And what people value or not in the 2000s, it's not what people value today. Like people today, a lot of people are dying to learn that those early blogs and just the archaeology and the history of the internet, but it's just vanished. It's just gone. It's been replaced by other formats. And those people that post those websites, I mean, the websites are gone because people have to pay a monthly hosting fee. They stop updating their website, and they say, well, I'm not going to pay this anymore, and the website goes away, and the domain gets sold to somebody else. So all those websites from the early 2000s, that shaped the culture that we live in today, we have no idea what they look like. We just don't know. We have memories, but memories are imperfect. They're gone forever. What was the question?
Okay, that was deep. That's actually that was actually the concern when we were in Iraq. There were some historians trying to get people to give them access to their emails, because in the past we studied war because we could read the correspondence that came home and came to the troops in the theater, and we could at some level understand the plight of the average Joe. But in the age of the internet, when everyone was sending their contacts home via email, or they were calling home, there wasn't as much of a recording from the troop level. So that is a concern. But getting it back to your writing,
hold on.
You've obviously mentioned.
I'm sorry, but you just mentioned, Iraq. I should have mentioned, Savage Headhunters is about war correspondence during World War II. It's based on actual war photographs. There was some, the soldiers in the Japanese theater of World War II on the Pacific Islands. They did a lot of headhunting. They posed with Japanese skulls for photographs. And these photographs appeared in Life magazine. They were very popular. People liked to look at them. So the story follows a war correspondent in World War II, photographing American soldiers with Japanese skulls to be photographed in Life magazine for the entertainment of troops back home. But there's like a frame narrative to my Tales to Make You Vomit series. And at the end of the frame narrative, I compare that to Abu Ghraib and all those photographs that came out and people's reactions to those photographs compared to people's reactions to the skull photographs. And so I totally wrote about war correspondence, and I was studying all of that. It's a satire, so I was kind of studying it to, write a satirical novel. So it's not entirely historically accurate, but there's some verisimilitude to that because I put a lot of heavy research into writing this book about World War II, but also about war correspondence. Yeah, sorry
Okay.
for.
So, no, you're absolutely okay. So you did mention that you had alien creatures and magical creatures in your fantasy and sci-fi. So how do you go about creating them? Do you let your nightmares inspire you? Do you draw on Mother Nature, folklore and myth? Obviously, you've mentioned some of the folklore and myth, but as a general rule, when you're writing, what is your inspiration for the fantastical beings?
In my short stories, the beings are mostly in these stories alien, and I develop them the way any science fiction writer develops anything, which is I ask like questions like what if, and I create certain conditions, whether they're physical or cultural, that would create such creatures. For example, the rainbow-colored rockhopper is set in the asteroid belts at the edge of the solar system, around where Pluto is. But in the story, there's an atmosphere belt around where the asteroid belt is, and there's these rabbits called rockhoppers that hop from asteroid to asteroid, and they eat the asteroid grass there. So I imagine what would a creature need, and I gave them really strong rabbit-like legs and big ears to hear with the sonar, to hear what bounces off things. And I based it on the old fur trappers, the Mountain Man. I based the main character on the Mountain Man stories from the old American and Canadian old stories about the fur trappers. And I made kind of a comedic story. It's also based on Elmer Fudd and Bugs Bunny and everything, but I had him hunting the rockhopper across the asteroid, and I made rules for the world, and then I made the rockhopper to kind of fit within those rules. But then, on another note, I got a story called let me look at my paper really quick and see what my story is called. It's called Aid and Comfort. And, this is about an alien species that's the enemy of humanity. Their species invaded humans. We fought them off. And now there's some of them still living on Earth. And you're not allowed to provide them with aid and comfort because they're the enemy. So I kind of developed this this really liberal guy who takes in the alien species because he's just a real bleeding heart, and he just assumes the alien is going to behave like a human. But the problem is they have a very different ritual involving on a YouTube show. I can't say. I'm going number 2. I'm going to the bathroom. They have very different rituals involving that. And so the alien, does it in the wrong way that disgusts the human family that took him in. And the human family struggles to teach the alien how to go to the bathroom like a human being does. The alien's resistant and doesn't want to learn. And then it has a little bit of a twist ending. So, in terms of that, I was thinking about sociology, and I was thinking about how humans view alien species and how the humans would view the aliens, bathroom habits, but also how the alien would view the humans and the human attempts to make the alien go to use a bathroom like a human does. So, I was thinking about like I love a lot of the old sociological science fiction, and that's what this was. So this is really a sci-fi collection, like Tripping the Algist. Yeah, they're almost all sci-fi, and even the ones that aren't, that are more like fantasy, or more like weird sci-fi fantasy. So I was really thinking like a science fiction author. I kind of stopped writing science fiction during the pandemic because I just kind of stopped being able to envision a future during those years. Like everything was just kind of moving at once, and everything just seemed like the present to me. So during the pandemic, I really started looking to the past and to myth and history in order to write. But right now, this is all over. It's all behind. Like my last story was World War II, and I was looking at history. I'm in the mood to write another science fiction. I want to look to the future again. So I'm pretty sure. I don't know what my next story is going to be. I just published this book a week ago, and I don't know what my next book is going to be. But I'm really thinking of going back to science fiction and writing another sci-fi story, because I really do love these sci-fi stories that I wrote, and I really do want to write another one. So I might have to transition back to sci-fi.
Okay, so clearly this interview is winding down, but before we wrap this up, was there anything about Warrior Soul and other stories that we didn't ask?
Hi. I don't know. If there is, I can't remember it. If you're thinking of getting it, I'd order the paperback now, because to be honest, I'm not sure how long Amazon's going to let me have it up with that cover. It's not published everywhere. My books are usually wide. They're usually published everywhere. This one, it didn't make it to Kobo, so you can't find it on Kobo. You can't find it on Rituken. They own Kobo. You can't find it on their other sites. But Kobo is like, it's not an American company. It's half Japanese, half Canadian, and I think that's why, because it's international. It has different decency standards than the American ones do. But you can still find it on Amazon. But you can't find my paperback distributor. Wouldn't paperback out to all the regular stores I send it to. So the paperback is just on Amazon right now. That's it. So I'd order this paperback while Amazon still lets you, because I wasn't 100% sure I'd get away with this cover, to be honest. I'm kind of surprised I did. I mean, I just figured carpe diem, you only live once, and I decided to put this out. I've always wanted to put tits in my cover, never had the nerve to, and I figured it's now or never. You got this book coming out, you're not going to do it now, you're never going to do it. So I just said, sometimes you got to do it, seize the day, and so I did it. But I get this book. It might be a collector's item one of these days, and it's also just a really fantastic collection of stories that I think people are going to really enjoy and have a lot of fun reading. You've all heard of Kursova magazine. This has all 5 of my published stories in Kursova. You'll remember the Planetary Anthology series. This has both of the stories that appeared in that series from Superversive Press, Canadian Bay Press, owned by Richard Paolinelli. And and those planetary books are out of print, and every other book or anthology that these stories are in, other than Kursova, is out of print. I think, except for there's a few that aren't, but most of them are out of print. So this is the only place you're going to find most of these stories. So I guess I really hope that you buy this book, you check it out, and I've got 10 books out, so I hope you give them all a chance. Also give me a follow. My Substack is a great place to follow, because I write like a newsletter, every once a month, maybe twice a month, so you don't get bombarded with stuff from me. I just write like, here's what I got going on, here's what I'm working on, here's what I have coming up. It's a great way to keep in touch with my work without, with social media, you can get a little bombarded. I follow people on Facebook, Twitter, and it can be a little bit much, but with the Substack newsletter model, it's not quite so intense. So I like that. But I also hope you'll follow me on Twitter, follow me on Facebook. I'm pretty low key. I don't troll. I don't get into flame wars. I stay away from all that stuff. I don't shove politics down people's throat. I don't shove my opinions on anything down people's throat. I have them. I have opinions. I just don't think that, I don't like it when people do. People put a lot of negativity into the world on social media. I don't want to contribute to that, so I don't. I'm pretty low key on Facebook, pretty low key on Twitter. You got the links there. Pretty low key on Substack. You can follow me. There's going to be minimal risk of me turning out to be a crazy person, because I'm not. I'm not a crazy person. And I'm not like one of those attention whores that you see. So you can follow me, no risk. And if you don't like it, if you think for any reason, you can always unfollow. You can always unfollow that Substack. But I hope you'll give me a chance on all those sites, and I hope you'll give my books a chance too. Where Your Soul and Other Stories just came out March 16th. Savage Headhunters came out February 16th, and it's part of my Tales to Make You Vomit series that also includes She Was Asking for It and Kitty Cat Massacre. Those are extreme horror books. Do not read them unless you have a very strong stomach. Especially the first two. Asking for It, Kitty Cat Massacre. I go all the way on those two books. If you like gore, check it out. If not, all my books, a lot of my books have gore, but not like those. Not like Kitty Cat Massacre. Not like She Was Asking for It. Those books go really far.
Okay. And because he gave all of his social media links, I will go a little bit out of order, so it seems a little wonky, dear listener, dear viewer. But before we let you go, we have to harken back to our founding mantra. So please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right book. So do your part, people. And since we're going all out of order, now we will get back to the regularly scheduled program. And I will tell you, since he told you where he can be found, you can find us on Twitter at twitter.com/SF _fantasy, twitter.com/SF _fantasy _ Sierra Foxtrot _fantasy _ You can email us at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Again, blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. We have a Facebook group where all the shenanigans happen over at facebook.com/groups/Blasters and Blades Podcast. Again, /groups/Blasters and Blades Podcast. We have a Facebook page where all the cool things happen and book reviews are posted and all the cool things, but it doesn't have a dedicated URL. But you can help us do that by liking, following, and doing all the things over on our Facebook page. So just type into the search bar on Facebook for Blasters and Blades podcast, and you will find the page. We have a website at anchor.fm /blasters and blades. Again, anchor.fm /blasters and blades. Where for as little as 99 cents a month, you can help keep the lights on. These shows are not free to produce. So we appreciate your dedication to keeping us on the air, and your contributions help. You can support the show more directly at buymeacoffee.com /author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com /author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section this for the podcast, and I will keep my co-hosts, Doc Cisca and Nick Garber, duly caffeinated. They will drink until their liver explodes. And if they were here, they would say they're not a quitter. But with that being said, thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For Nick Garber and Doc Cisca, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. So, Manfred, thank you for coming onto the show. We appreciate your visiting again.
You're welcome. It was a lot of fun being on the show again. I really enjoy, being on here. So thank you so much for having me. And to everybody back home, thank you for listening too. I really appreciate it. Thank you for listening. Thank you for reading. And as J.R. Handley said, thank you for reviewing too. All that, I really appreciate it. I appreciate it so much every time somebody buys one of my books. I appreciate it every time somebody reviews one of my books on their blog or on Amazon or on Goodreads or on another site. I appreciate it every time somebody tweets about one of my books or even retweets one of my tweets about my books. All of that helps me out so tremendously. I appreciate it every time somebody mentions one of my books on Facebook. So, just thank you so much to everybody out there. You're all just wonderful people, and I'm so glad to have you in my universe and in my circle, and all of that. So, thank you.
All right. Thank you, people. And until